Someone and they're here tonight, and it's a problem that's been bothering me for a great deal of time. It's a problem that I cannot seem to get over. It just seems like every time things get better, this thing keeps popping up. And it's a struggle for me. And as I thought about it even more, I thought it's best to make that person known to you tonight. And that's me. And if you're honest with yourself, you have a problem with that person too. Not me. You. Because all of us face something inside of us that we struggle with on a daily basis. How often do you say to yourself, how often do you say to yourself, I wish I hadn't have done that. I wish I didn't do that. I wish I was better at this. I wish I could do this better. I wish I was more like this. And even when when we motivate ourselves to change, it seems that just when we get going, something happens and we do something stupid. You know, we do something and it just knocks us back down, and the more we try to take a step forward, we're taking 2 steps back. And I think I'm not alone in myself struggling with this. In fact, I know I'm not alone. I'm not alone because I know in the Bible, Paul says he struggled with the exact same thing that I do. He says the things that I do, in 2 Corinthians, he tells us the things that I do, that's what I hate. And the things that I should be doing that I'm not, that's the problem. I know what I'm supposed to do, and yet the reason why I don't do those things is because I am in the flesh. That's what he says. Because I am fleshly. That's why he complains. I don't want to say complain. I don't think Paul complained. I think he just makes known that he's become content with this thorn in the flesh that he's suffering with, that he has to deal with. Whatever that thorn might have been, if it was a physical ailment, if it was something else going on, it's none of our business, to be honest with you, of what it is. But Paul lets it be known that there's a struggle that he faces between his flesh, his body, and his spirit, his mind. Having the desire to do, but not doing what we want to do. Having the desire to stop doing something, but not being able to do it. In John chapter 3, Jesus comes to Nicodemus. Well, rather, let me rephrase that. Nicodemus comes to Jesus at night. And when he comes to Jesus at night, Jesus answers the question that he doesn't even ask. He's thinking, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Just like everybody else is thinking. But he doesn't even get to ask that question yet. Jesus answers it. It says, except a man be born of water and the Spirit, he cannot enter into the kingdom of heaven. That you have to be born of water and the Spirit. He says something very specific for us to note in verse 6 that's going to take us on a journey for a few months. That which is born of flesh is flesh. That which is born of spirit is spirit. Now, I may be misunderstanding that, but when I look at it this way, I look at an apple tree is going to give forth apples. An orange tree is going to give forth orange. That's what it does. That's what it's supposed to. So if I look at it in this way, that which is born of flesh is flesh. But then that which is born of spirit is spirit. Like there's 2 categories that he's saying that you're part of. You're a part of the flesh, and once you become a part of the flesh, you're in the flesh. You know, not a single one of us here are not born of the flesh. Every one of us here have been born of the flesh, and we struggle with this battle. Now, I'd like to see a hand. I'd like to see it. If there's somebody in this audience tonight that has not faced this struggle, that thinks this is easy, that is able to control their emotions, that's able to control their flesh. If you are able to control your body and hold it into subjection 100%, I'll even say 90% of the time, I'd like to see a hand. And And Emily Burns sits down really fast. None of us are. I'm talking about something that we all struggle with. So you can't say, I wish Matt would teach something that's pertinent to me. I wish you'd preach on something that matters in my life. Well, this is it. Because all of us are born of the flesh. And the end result is that we produce things of the flesh. And we don't like it. We give in to the flesh. But he tells us that there's two births there. You're born of water. That's the flesh. That's the flesh birth. That's what I understand it to be here in the Scriptures. I could be mistaken. But that first birth that happens, born of water, is when a man or woman is born of a woman and comes out and the water breaks and they come out of the womb. That's the first birth. The Spirit is the second spirit that he's talking about. You're born of water. That which is born of flesh is flesh. But that which is born of Spirit will allow themselves to be controlled by the Spirit. The flesh is flesh. It's going to be controlled by the flesh. But that which is born of Spirit will allow itself to be controlled by the Spirit. And I think that's what Paul tells us his struggles with. So as we look for the next couple months, and I do say months because it's going to take us some time, and Sunday nights are not an opportunity that we get all the time because of different things that we do. I think it's worthy of our study to look at the differences between the flesh and the Spirit. I looked in my mind, I racked my brain for days to try to come up with a new series that we could do that would be pertinent to us all, that would kind of make a difference and try to affect us all. And I looked at different books that we could study, and I looked at different series on the internet that maybe I could develop, and my own imagination tried to come up with things, and my wife said, why don't you just do a sermon on this? And it just clicked. So you can blame her if you feel guilty. She writes all my stuff anyway. Flesh. Galatians 5. Look there with me for a moment. Galatians 5. When we look at this passage in Galatians 5, Paul lets us know lets us know in this passage here how to stop being of the flesh and how to be born of the Spirit, or what it means to be born of the Spirit. Not how to, we know that is through baptism, but the how to, that's in other places. This here is what it means to be born of the Spirit. Look at verse 16. But I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For if the desires of the flesh are against the Spirit, and the desires of the Spirit are against the flesh, these are opposed to each other, to keep you from doing the things you want to do. Did you even know that was in there? Read it again. Listen to what it says. Walk by the Spirit, you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For if the desires of the flesh are against the Spirit, and the desires of the Spirit are against the flesh, they're opposed to one another, to keep you from doing the things you want to do. He says the way to stop being controlled by the flesh, the way to start being controlled by the Spirit, it says simply here in this passage, he says, walk by the Spirit. What does it mean to walk by the Spirit? Well, let's look at it this way. If I say that me and my wife went outside, me and Leah decided to go, we live close to Atlas and they have a great parking lot that's lit up that we can walk around at night. If we want to go walk in the evening. If I go out with my wife and I say I went walking with my wife, what do you understand that to mean? What does that mean? Does it mean that I'm lapping her, that I'm running way in front? Does it mean that she's way behind or way in front of me? If I say I'm walking with my wife, it means we're together. We're moving in the same direction together. Now, there may be times where she speeds up or I speed up, but for the most part, you would understand that to mean walking together, means being side by side, means being intertwined, means being close. Paul says, if you want to learn what it's like to live a life that's led by the Spirit, that is opposed to the flesh, and trust me, you want to be opposed to the flesh, because when we get in detail in the next few weeks about these works of the flesh and what they are, it's going to open your eyes, because a lot of you are going to be saying, I do that. You're going to be shocked when we read about licentiousness. You're going to be shocked when we read about idolatry, and when we study about all of these things that are mentioned in these works of the flesh, that he says not once but twice. If you are doing these things, or if you are involved in endorsing people that are doing these things, you will not enter into the kingdom of heaven. Now let's break that down to see what that means. If I will not go through that door, it means I'm not getting through that door. And if the other side of that is heaven, the kingdom of God, heaven, that means I can't get there unless I go through that door. And if I'm doing these things, I'm not going through that door. So I want us to understand exactly what it means to live by the Spirit or to live by the flesh. Walking in the Spirit, walking in the flesh. If I'm walking in the Spirit, I've got the Spirit with me on a daily basis, hand in hand, going about my day, communicating with Him as He's communicating with me through the written Word and through prayer. That's how you live a life that's controlled by the Spirit. That's how we're going to be changing over to live that life. They're contrary to one another, it says there. They lie opposite. That's what that means. Opposite of one another, to oppose. A few things here that I wrote down. The Spirit says, get up, go to church. The flesh says, what excuse can I come up with this time? You ever thought of that? The Spirit says, give to those that need it. The flesh says, why should I give to them when I'm in just as bad as need? The Spirit says, don't give in to that feeling. The flesh says, why not? It feels so good. And God will forgive me anyway. You said those things? You don't have to be embarrassed, because every one of us have. Every one of us have been, maybe not these three specifics, but you've been there. So let's look at the conflict. Let's look at the problem with the flesh. Let's look at what it means. The flesh, the conflict that we deal with here, it's flat out, simple as you can break it down. It's sin. That's all it is. The conflict is sin. Because your body gives in to the flesh, and that's what sin is. If you give in to your temper, you shout off and you yell in anger and you do something you shouldn't. If you give in to lust, you act upon that lust and you do things that you shouldn't. If you are acting upon that desire to have greed, you will take things or do things that are inappropriate, that hurt others, just to be able to succeed and get what you want. It's all about getting what you want. And that's why it's so difficult, because we all have a you. We all have got a me, and we all want, and we all desire. And it's a fight, it's a struggle to say no to that person. The conflict is sin. Where does sin come from? Now, don't go let your mind go, Eve did it. Eve's the one that ate of the fruit. Or don't let it even go, Adam, sin was omission, where he should have done something and stopped her because he knew better. Eve was deceived, but Adam knew better. Don't go there. Where is just the blanket statement of where does sin come from? does it really come from the devil? The devil is a sinful creature. He sinned. He rebelled against God. And now he is there. But does the devil cause you to sin? Now, the devil might tempt us. We've been talking a lot in a 6th grade class at school about this passage I'm going to point out to you in just a second. And I asked the kids, I said, what causes us to sin? And here's the answers I got. Our friends, movies, our TV, the music, bad role models. Are those the things that cause you to sin? The answer, yes. That's what causes us to sin. Church, as long as we keep that mindset, we're always going to have this problem. Because all we do is we push off the blame. What that says is, it's your fault that I struggle. It's your fault that I'm a sinner. Is that true? That's not it. James, and you know where I'm going with this. James 1. Look at James 1. And listen to what James says here to us. And it lets us see the conflict is a lot more close to home than we want it. Let no man say, verse 13, when he is tempted, I'm being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. But each one is tempted when he is lured away and enticed by his own desire. Each man, each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Where's that word lure that reminds you of a fisherman? All right, let's fish for a little bit. We got our fishing rod, we got our lure, and I'm going to take that lure and I'm going to put on that rod and I'm going to cast it out in the open water. And that lure is in the water. The bait is in the water. And that fish comes by. And I catch that fish. Surprisingly. Is it the bait? Is the bait the reason why the fish was caught? Is the lure what caught the fish? What does the lure do? The lure just sits around in the water. It moves. It attracts. But does the lure cause the sin? No. What catches the fish is the fish's desire to eat the lure. That's what it is. The lure is just there. It is just a party that's there. And it could be innocent at times. It doesn't have to be sinful. The temptation doesn't have to be sinful. The sin is what makes it the sin. And it is the desire to have it that causes the fish to get caught. If the fish is not hungry, you can move that lure around all over, but it ain't gonna. That's where the fish are that I fish with. Smartest fish in the world. They can see me coming a mile away. If they're not hungry, if they don't want it, they're not gonna jump. Each man is tempted when he is lured away and enticed by his own desire. That's the flesh. That's you. Your sin is your fault. Your sin is brought about by your desires, by your feelings, by your emotion. Where do those desires come from? Well, no, that's individual, I guess. That's based on where you're born, what kind of family you were born into, what your experience as a child. I guess all of those things run into play of what tempts each individual, because what tempts me may not tempt you. I'm tempted by things that you are in no way tempted by, and vice versa. Some are similar, but a lot are different. So those types of desires, where do they come from? That's based on each individual and their situation. But the point that I want you to see is the reason why sin is there is because we want it. We're the ones that are the driving force to take it. And that's why he says that which is born of flesh is flesh. See, God makes it clear to us. You can't help yourself. You want it and you're going to go after it. That's who you are. You're born. Now that's not an excuse. But that is biology. He says you can't do it on your own, because if you could do it on your own, if you could say no every time, if you could handle the flesh, if you could control it on your own, there would have been no use of the cross. There would have been no use of the cross. It would have been, let's see, Adam and Seth and Enos and Cain. We get to Cain here in the genealogy, and Cain was the one man that you could look at, and he lived that faithful life. The Lord could have easily looked at it. If he knew how to handle it, if he knew how to control his emotions and his flesh, the Lord could have said, look at Cain and pattern your life after him. Look at what he does and changes in his lifestyle so that he doesn't sin. But he didn't do that. See, he couldn't do that, because there is no human being that can handle it on their own. It took the God-man in Jesus to be that pattern, that sacrifice for us. So he says, you're born of the flesh. You can't help it. You're going to do it. You're drawn in by your own lust and enticed. And that's where sin comes from. Now look at what the rest of the passage says. Then that desire, when it has conceived, when it's give birth, sin comes from that desire. If this remote is yours, and I want it, I don't want one like it, I want that remote. My desire is to have that remote. I'm making this as elementary as we can get it. I'm dumbing it down for every one of us. I want that remote. And I want it so bad. That desire is so strong within me, it's going to lead me to sin and take the remote. You see that? See how easy that is? Every man is tempted. Every person is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. When you see that desire, when you know it and you feel it, if you allow it to grow inside of you, you've got the desire. But the problem comes is when the desire begins to grow inside of you. When you start thinking about what it would be like to have this remote. Man, my life would change if I had that remote. It would be so easy with life if I had this remote. If I had this remote, I would be cool. If I had this remote, I would fit in. If I had this remote, all of my problems would be solved. Well, I know it'd be wrong, but God will overlook that if it grows within us, and the growth causes the action in the sin. And he's very clear what he says next. And sin brings, when it's fully grown, when that sin is matured, death. And then in the very next, that's a very depressing passage. He says that's a very depressing passage, and in the next verse he says, do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. But then he changes complete thoughts altogether. It's like the two thoughts shouldn't even be there, but they are. They're together and they're there for a reason. Every man's tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed, and when that lust has grown and developed, it brings forth sin, and that sin, that action, sin when it's matured, brings forth death. Don't be deceived, my beloved brethren. Every good and perfect gift comes from God. That doesn't come from God. That's not what comes from God. The good and perfect gift that comes from God is the Spirit that enables us, with His help, to say no. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take this conflict of sin. Because if we continue in sin, let me tell you two natures of sin that I think that we overlook. The two natures of sin. We think we can do it once and we'll be all right. Or we can just give in a little bit and that'll suffice us. The two natures of sin that causes the majority part of problems is, number one, it's addictive. It's addictive. Okay? Addictive means the settled tendency or usual matter of behavior. A behavioral pattern acquired by frequent repetition. Dependence, compulsive need for the use of, a habit. Psychological need and symptoms, if not satisfied, withdrawal happens. Persistent compulsive use known to be harmful. The need to resort to on a regular basis. Behavior becomes automatic, unthinking, becomes your mental makeup. It says that it's so addictive that it becomes part of you. Those last two that I read are very important. It becomes part of your behavior makeup. Automatic. The more you give in, it's addictive, then it just becomes automatic and it becomes a way of life, and that's how you live. That describes a drug addict, that describes an alcoholic, that describes a porn addict, that describes any type of addict. And not only does it become part of our lifestyle in that behavior becoming automatic. Now that's not a word that I'm defining biblically. That's the word I'm looking at in our English language, addictive, what it means. Becomes part of your mental makeup. But the second part of the sin that is just as bad is the tolerance aspect of it. Not only do you become addicted to it, you become tolerant of it. That means it's okay for you to see it to happen because you're so used to it. And it doesn't hurt anymore. Now I need to finish up, but there's a reason why the church in decades before, where we used to have response after response. And I'm not pleading for responses tonight. If you feel the need to respond, then more power to you, and we'll do what we can for you, and the Lord will take care of you. All right? But the reason why we don't have, I think, the responses that we used to have is because of this tolerance thing. We've become tolerant of it. We've become so tolerant of it, we're not calling sin anymore. We're calling it a matter of opinion. We're calling it, in some cases, mental illness. Not all cases. We're calling it genetic makeup. We're calling it, we're born that way. You got that right. And what's happening is we become so tolerant. That passage in 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 2 is so powerful. It says that they have their conscience seared with a hot iron. Listen to that. Their conscience is seared with a hot iron. If you sear something with a hot iron, it's going to become calloused. The scar tissue around it is going to be nullified. It's going to nullify any feeling. You will have no feeling in that burn. That's the problem with our hearts. Is we have allowed sin to become so part of our lives. We're addicted to it. We're tolerant of it. And when somebody tells us that we're wrong in doing it, it makes us mad. It makes us mad, and we argue. And preachers are fired for it. And people leave the church for it. Because nobody likes to be told that they're doing something wrong. I told you from the very beginning up here, the one person I struggle with the most is me. That I'm in the same boat. And I'm going to tell you, we have a sin problem. And I hope that over the next couple months, as we take these individual sins of the works of the flesh and break them down, but not only just break these individual sins down. See, they're broken down in a pattern. I think I left this on your handout. There are 4 sins of lust. That's the first one, the first breakdown when you look at these Galatians 5:19 passage. There are 4 sins of lust. There are 2 sins that are about your lack of submission to God or superstition. All right? There are 9 sins that are listed there that deal with your temper. I don't mean just your anger temper, but the temper, your matter of being, of who you are, your personality, how you react, your behavior. 9 different sins that are mentioned. And then there are 2 sins of appetite. All right? That's 4 breakdowns. When you look at those 4 breakdowns, lust, lack of submission, temper, and appetite, when you go on over to the fruits of the Spirit that he tells us to walk in, there are 4 categories of that too. Lo and behold, how does that work? You take 4 out, you put 4 in. And church, you're walking by the Spirit. You substitute these sins that we are involved in, and you put in these fruits of the Spirit and let them rule your life. Paul says that's how. You will never be perfect. You will never be perfect. You will never be completely 100% happy with yourself and your sin, but you're not supposed to be. You're supposed to rely on Jesus. You're supposed to trust Him, to try as hard as you can, and to not give in today. That's it. That's all He asks. Right now, we have 6 or 7 hours left in this day. Your goal for the day is not to give in today. Don't worry about tomorrow. Don't worry about those sins that are going to happen in the night. Today. He wants you to focus on today. And for the rest, we'll handle that when we get there. You don't give in now. So here's the thought for you as the invitation is offered. For some of you, you can't wait. You can't. I mean, you've given in way too much, and you need to come back. You need to have your sins washed away. You need to be restored, and you need to be able to go home tonight and start fresh. There's a lot of us here that probably need to do that. Will there be a lot up here? Probably not. But if we're totally honest with ourselves, that's where we should be. Because, church, we have a sin problem. We are born of the flesh, and we serve the flesh. So our goal is to look at what it means to be of the flesh, and once we understand that, we take those things out. Let's put this Spirit in, and then we will take off spiritually. We will take off spiritual. And people will see us as people of intensity, as people of integrity, and people that are involved in this world, and we can change the world for good. But we got to start with ourselves. So look at your life, and if there's changes that need to be made, make those changes as we stand and sing that invitation song. To its brink, 'tis the fount of love from the